Okay, I think we've got it working, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Well, I'll wait a second so everybody can find this post. Okay. Alright, so since we're a little bit behind, I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. This is the second session of the Language Documentation Training Center and Endangered Languages Project online webinar series about language documentation for 2020. So my name is Jacob Hakim. I'm a student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and I've been part of the Language Documentation Training Center for about 4 years. So this is the fourth year of my PhD program, and I'm studying language documentation specifically in Indonesia. So I work with Indonesian languages, and I work particularly in the island of Sumatra. And so I've had a few times that I've gotten to go to Indonesia and experience linguistic fieldwork firsthand. So I'm going to be presenting about audio and video recording. I'm going to be talking about some tips, basic tips, and best practices for audio and video recording for language documentation. So first, let's talk about audio recording for recording spoken language. So what is the purpose of recording language? There are a lot of things that these recordings might be used for. So we want to think about it and plan how we're going to record ahead of time so that we can create recordings with the highest possible quality. So some of the purposes of recordings are for linguistic analysis, studying grammar or phonology, especially if you're studying phonetics or phonology. The quality of the recording is really important. For teaching purposes, the recordings can be used later for teaching a language, and maybe most importantly, for preservation of important cultural speech genres and patterns, and culturally encoded knowledge, which can only be found in that language. And so the audio recording is really the cornerstone of the language documentation project. So making sure that you're coming into your goals with audio recording with the best practices in mind. That's going to help you create the best audio recordings that are going to be the most effective for whatever goals you have in mind. So first, let's talk about the tools you're going to need to record language. The basic tool for recording spoken language is the audio recorder. So an audio recorder is a dedicated machine that has built-in microphones but also has microphone inputs, and they run on batteries. They don't have electronic noise, so they create clean, high-quality audio recordings. And there are lots of different brands and different kinds at different price levels, and depending on what's available to you, you may end up using any one of these. So those are the audio recorder, but you also need to think about what kind of microphone you want to use. So there are different kinds of microphones that you can plug into the audio recorder to get even higher quality recordings. So the first kind is the shotgun microphone. This is this long one, and the reason it's called the shotgun microphone is because it records everything in a direct line in the direction that it's pointing, but it doesn't really pick up sound in any other direction. There are also handheld microphones that you might be familiar with. These are the kinds of microphones you see during speeches or at stage performances. And then the third kind is the lapel microphone, also known as a lavalier microphone. And these microphones are really small, and they clip onto your shirt or collar, and they sit near your mouth, and that way they can pick up just one speaker at a time. So the circles show that the shotgun and the lapel microphone are the kind of microphones that we use for language documentation. We do not use, it's not really good to use the handheld microphone because it's not designed for this kind of work. So the lapel microphone in particular is good for recording one speaker at a time. So having one of those microphones for each speaker plugged into your audio recorder is going to yield the cleanest audio. So I just want to go over this really quick. This is microphone directionality. So this is just talking about the ways that different kinds of microphones are designed to pick up audio in certain directions. So you have 4 kinds of directional microphones. One is called the unidirectional microphone. So as the name implies, this microphone records in one direction. So that's the one in the top left corner. That's called a cardioid microphone because the shape of the area that it can pick up is in the shape of a heart. There's also the supercardioid microphone, which is this one in the bottom right corner, which is the same cardioid shape, but also picks up a little bit behind it. Okay, I'm just going to check and make sure everything's going okay. Okay, great. Then you have the omnidirectional microphone, which is the top right one, and this one records in all 4 directions. And that can be good if you have people sitting in a circle or around a room, but it picks up more noise as well. So the broader direction you have, the less focus you have in what kind of noise and sound you're going to pick up, and you're going to pick up more noise. And then last is the bidirectional microphone, which, as you can see in the bottom left corner, records to the front and back, but to the sides it doesn't really pick up. You might not have to worry too much about this, but it's good to understand how the microphones work and to make sure you're going to use the equipment that you want to use. So you might be wondering, why not just record with the microphone on the computer or with the microphone on your phone? So these microphones on the computer and phone are designed to cut off certain parts of the audio signal because they're not designed to store high quality audio. So when you record, you're not getting the full picture and you're going to lose some auditory acoustic information, and it also might be lower quality. It automatically removes background noise, which you don't really want when you record language. You want to have every piece, and you can go in later and take out and study the parts that you want, but you don't want to cut anything out at the beginning. Also, using computers with their built-in microphones, they have their own noises that are coming from inside them, electric noise or mechanical noise. So using that microphone might end up being noisy. But if you don't have access to an audio recorder like the ones showed above, the next best thing to do is to try and get your hands on a nice microphone and plug that into a phone or computer, because that will pick up better audio, which you can record to a phone or computer. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So once you've got your equipment, the next very important step is choosing your recording environment. When you want to record somebody talking, whether it's an interview or somebody telling a story or just a conversation, you always want to try and have as much control as you can over where the recording is going to take place, because that can really affect the quality of the recording. Just a second. Okay. So you can't always control where the recording is going to happen. Maybe people don't want to sit inside, it's too hot, or maybe people don't want to sit in a certain way. So the situation will not always be ideal, but it's good to keep these things in mind so that you can do the best you can to create a nice recording environment you'll be able to record clear audio. Doing this can dramatically improve the quality of the recording. And another important thing to think about is that noise that we don't usually notice can be very disruptive in an audio recording, and it can ruin the recording altogether if you're not careful. So some examples of these things that can be very disruptive in a recording: fans, electric fans. A lot of people record in hot places. Indonesia is very hot, so people usually aren't very happy when I ask them to turn off the fan, but it's very important because the fan blasting into the room and hitting the microphone is going to cause a lot of noise. Children running around. So if you try to record in a living room or a space where the families usually hang out, this can be very disruptive and loud too. Animals, in Indonesia there are dogs and roosters, background chatter, so other people talking or the TV, cell phones going off. Electrical appliances are things we don't usually notice, but they can be very loud in a recording. Also, eating snacks, especially crunchy snacks, can be very disruptive, or tapping, or recording near a street. So this is a lot to think about, and you can't always avoid all of it, but you can try to do the best you can to create a scenario where you can record away from some of these things. So here's an example of an ideal recording environment that's going to yield a really nice, clear recording. So hopefully it will be inside in a soft room. So that means a room that has maybe a carpet or soft curtains, because if you have tile floor and no curtains and a hard wall and no furniture, there's going to be a lot of echo and reverb because people talking, their voices are going to bounce off the hard surfaces. So if you can find a nice, quiet indoor space that doesn't have so many hard surfaces, make sure the windows are closed if possible. Make sure there are no fridges near the recording or electric fans, and no extra people hanging around because them talking in the background can also be very disruptive. So that's not always going to be possible, but even managing to move inside instead of being outside, even if you can't deal with the other things, that's still going to have a huge impact. The next important step, once you've decided where you want to record and you've got everybody sitting around, your participants who are going to be recorded, you need to check the sound levels on your audio recorder. So now we're talking about those audio recorders from earlier, like the Zoom or the Tascam. Before you get started, you want to check the levels. This is different from volume. Volume, even though it says volume on the slide, it should not say that. Volume is when you're listening to something, but these levels are the input level of your recording. So if you don't check the levels beforehand, there are two things that can happen. It can be too loud, where basically the input signal is too high and a lot of your frequencies are going to get cut off. Or it can be too low and you won't be able to hear anything. So the way that most recorders work is there will be a big record button in the middle, and you press it one time and it should start blinking. This is how most recorders I've ever used work. So pressing it once does not start it, but it turns it on, and you tell it that you want to record soon. So it starts to display the levels. Then usually I'll ask speakers to try and say something. I'll say, "What did you eat for breakfast today?" or "Where did you go earlier today?" And as they're talking, I'll look at the levels and try to make sure they're within a certain window. If they go all the way up on the screen, then it's too high and it's going to be clipping. But if it's just a little bit, it's going to be too low and you're not going to be able to hear anything. If you have headphones, you can plug them in and you can listen yourself and you can check the levels. But if you don't have headphones, you can use the screen. But this is a very important step, and it's a mistake that I've made a lot of times and something you will definitely encounter as you're starting to record. You have to do it for each speaker if you're using different recorders. So you have to check each recorder and make sure your levels are good, and try and get them to speak as if we're going to speak during the recording. So usually I have recorded conversations, so I try to get people to talk about something so I can check the levels before we leave, and so that it will be natural and the levels will be accurate. So here we're going to get a little bit into how to record a little bit more. So you check the levels. Before that even, you want to set the recorder settings. As soon as you get the recorder, before you are getting ready to record, you want to make sure the settings are set to the frequency is 44.1 kilohertz or 44,100 kilohertz. 44,100 hertz, which is the frequency, and you want to make sure that the resolution is 16-bit. This is just referring to the quality of the audio recording. Some recorders go higher, and you can record higher if you want. So you can record at 24-bit or something like that. And you want to record as a WAV file. This will make sure the audio is not compressed and it's going to be high quality. These are the standard settings for recording audio. So just before you do anything else, make sure you have your recorder set to this. So when everybody's set up and you're ready to record, you press the record button once. It'll start blinking or something. Each one is different, so you have to try it out yourself. You're going to check the levels, make sure your audio levels are good, ask the participants to talk a little bit, and then you are going to press the record button again, and it will start recording for real. So now you've started the recording. So just like I said in the previous slide, you need to press record twice for it to start on most audio recorders. At the beginning, well, first you want to do something called slating, which I don't have on here, but I'll talk about for video recording. But you're going to slate, which usually involves clapping, and that's to sync up the audio and video file. And then at the beginning, you also want to say a little bit of metadata. So metadata is data about the data. So it's information about the recording. Basically names of participants, where it's being recorded, maybe the name of the recording, things like this. You say it at the beginning so that when you go back and listen to it later, you can hear that and say, oh, now I remember what this is about, without having to listen to the whole thing. And especially if you don't know the language yourself, then you need this kind of information to know what's happening. Okay. So earlier we talked a little bit about recording with a phone. If you don't have access to an audio recorder, it's possible to record with a smartphone. If you have the audio recorder, yes, the audio recorder and microphone are always better. But if you don't, you can record audio on a phone, and any recording is better than no recording. So, things to remember if you're going to use a cell phone, a smartphone, to record somebody speaking. Make sure the phone is really close to them. If it's far away, it might not pick them up at all, and it will pick up a lot of noise. Make sure to practice recording and listen to it so you can see what it's going to be like, and try different things. Try moving the phone around and see if the levels are good. That's really important because otherwise you have no idea what's going to come out on the other side when you're done. Place the phone on a soft surface to avoid rattling. If it's on a table and the table is moving, the microphone is on the phone, so it's going to pick up all that noise. It's going to be really loud. Also, make sure the phone is on airplane mode or is set so that you can't receive calls or texts, because at best that's going to create a lot of noise, electrical noise and ringer noise or vibrations, and at worst it can delete your recording and stop anything from being saved, which is kind of the worst case scenario, and you'll lose all of that data. Another thing that has come up recently, especially in this time where everybody is dealing with coronavirus, so maybe you had plans to go visit somewhere and conduct field work and record in person, but now you can't travel because of coronavirus. A lot of people still want to work and do research and record people speaking or record conversations, but can't travel. So this is kind of new, and I'm not an expert on this at all, but there are ways that you can still create recordings. The quality is not going to be nearly as good, of course, because you're not together, you're not with the person, but having something is always better than having nothing. So, if you want to do some remote recording, first think about what's the purpose of your recording. Are you recording a conversation? Are you in the conversation? Are you a native speaker? Or are you trying to set up other native speakers of a language to talk together and have a conversation? Or are you having a discussion of grammar or vocabulary? Or are you trying to record a narrative or a song? So these are good questions to ask because, I mean, if you want to record something like a song or a narrative, you don't really even need to set up this kind of remote recording. You can ask the performer or the speaker to record themselves using their own means if possible. But if you want to record, for example, a discussion about grammar and vocabulary, this is something that you can accomplish with remote recording. So the way that I've been doing it is to connect with a speaker of a language. The language that I'm studying is called Nassau. So I connect with my collaborator in Sumatra, and we talk with just audio on Skype. And a question that comes up is, should you record in the app or use a different software? Um, the opinion differs from person to person, but because managing the ways that this data is used and making sure the data is used in a way that is approved by the language speakers, the people who you're recording, because that's really important, it's probably better not to record in the app because there might be something in the small print that they can take that recording and use it in their own way. So the way that I've been doing is we talk on Skype just so that we can communicate between ourselves, and then we have another way to record ourselves individually. So I record myself on my computer, my collaborator records himself on his computer, he sends me his recording, and I connect them. It's a lot of work, but because of the situation that we're in, it's going to take more work to accomplish similar things. So, something really important if you want to try this kind of remote recording, make sure you're going through your workflow as normal and you're treating your files as normal. And what I mean is to stay organized and make sure you're naming your files consistently and processing them and editing them and storing them where you want to store them. Because as I'm going to talk about later, if you don't do all of these things consistently and make it a habit, it's really easy to get lost and you can lose recordings, forget what they're called, they can get deleted. And that's really terrible because this is the basis, the foundation of documentation. So I'll get more into that staying organized toward the end. So some key points about audio recording. High quality recordings are possibly the most important part of language documentation and analysis and revitalization and conservation. Um, make sure to record at the standard of 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit resolution and record as a WAV file. Do what you can to have a nice recording environment and eliminate background noise. And remember the basic steps for recording. So once everybody's set up, press the button once, check and adjust the audio levels, which you'll have to learn how to do it for each different recorder, and press the record button again to begin. And the reason I keep talking about this process is because there have been times where it's 10 minutes into a recording and I realized I only pressed the button once and it hasn't actually been recording. So these are mistakes that I've made that I just want to tell you in advance so you might not have to make the same mistakes. Okay, so I talked a little bit about file naming. I won't stay too long on this, but it's important to make sure you have a consistent way to name your files so that it's organized and informative. So these are some examples of naming, and the files are just, when you make a recording, you're going to take the file off of your phone, off of your recorder, and you're going to store it somewhere. And you want to make sure that it's organized well. So you can see that the good file names have maybe the initials of the speaker and the date, or the name of the speaker and the date, and it has something about what's happening in it. So this is Frog Story. So they seem really long, but it's really good to have all of this information. And I think that you need to at least have the date and some sort of identifying information about the content. So the kind of naming we use at LDTC, we have LDTC to show that it's a recording from LDTC, and then you have the ISO code, which is something that you can look up. Every language has or is in the process of getting an ISO code. Most languages have them already set up. And I'll talk a little bit about what ISO is too. And then XY is the number of the recording out of the total number of recordings that we've made so far. So this will change every semester. And you don't have to use this, but you want to come up with some way to identify the files in a consistent way. Sorry about the siren noise. So having the language code is good because you'll know what language is recorded. Having some sort of identifier to show the content is good, so a C for conversation or an S for song, that kind of thing. And having the name of the speaker is good, having the number is good if it's more than one on the same day. So that's the kind of thing you can decide and you can try out, but once you get a system, you want to stick with it. So about ISO codes. ISO codes are 3-letter identifiers that give a unique name for each of the world's languages. So there are lots of reasons that these exist, but basically it just helps people make sure they're talking about the same thing. So the ISO code for English is ENG. The ISO code for Nassau, the language that I work on, is NSY. And this is just something to identify the language in a shorthand way. And you can find the full list on the SIL website or on Wikipedia. You can find the ISO for each individual language. Okay, a little bit about metadata. So I talked about metadata before, talking about metadata at the beginning of your recording. But besides doing that, you should also definitely write down as much metadata as possible on your journal or your notebook or somewhere in the computer. There's apps you can use for recording metadata. And this is so important for organizing your data and for making the data useful later. If it's going in an archive, it will need really robust metadata. So metadata is information about your recording. Appropriate metadata puts the recording in context, eases access to the material. If it's just a file name, people are not going to know what's in it. They're not going to know how to find what they want to hear. But if you have lots of descriptions telling things like who's speaking, where is it being recorded, what languages are used, where are those languages used, what's the content, a short description about what happened, what was discussed, what kind of things were talked about in the conversation. This is so important. And if you don't know enough of the language you're studying to do this yourself, you can work together with somebody and come up with some short descriptions about the content. But this is so important for each individual file. Okay, I think that's good. Now let's get on to video recording. So that was all about audio recording, but it goes hand in hand with video recording. So why do we want to record video? Language is something we hear, right? It seems like audio recordings might be enough, but language is more than only speech. Seeing someone's face while they're talking and their gestures while they're talking, it tells you a lot. I know you can't see my face right now. I had some trouble with the camera, but you might be able to understand more of what I mean or what I'm thinking or how I feel if you could see me. Video recording allows us to see the language in context. Instead of just having it, we're listening to it, you can see it. You can see people sitting together. You can see people doing things. And people like to watch videos. People might be more likely to watch a video that you record rather than just to listen to an hour of conversation. And people feel cool when you say, here's an hour-long video of you. It looks really good, and you can show it to people. It's something nice for them. So one important thing when you're getting ready to record video, you have your camera or video recorder. Those are sort of interchangeable. You want to make sure you have good framing, and framing is how you set up the camera and what it's going to show. So you want to make sure that people's upper bodies, from about the stomach up, are showed, and that their arms are shown so that they can move their arms around and it won't go out of the frame. The camera should not be up high looking down on people because you won't be able to see their faces very well. So the camera is usually about face level if possible. And you want to make sure everything's in focus. That's really important, and most cameras do this sort of automatically, but you want to take time to make sure that that happens. So people have different ideas about this, but for me and the way we do things at LDTC, a very important thing with recording video is when you start, you don't want to move the camera at all. It might seem like zooming is really cool, and zooming from one speaker to the next is really important, and it will add some excitement, but it takes away from the focus of the video, and it can make it really hard to watch, hard to understand. You might miss something that's happening somewhere else. So once the camera's set up, it's best just to leave it where it is, and I usually go far away from it, and it just does its own thing. So here's some examples of framing. These frames are not very good. So in the top left, you can see that she's cut off. Part of her face is cut off. If she moves her right arm, it will be out of the video. The one on the top right might seem better because she's in the center of the frame, but the camera is so high that you're going to miss some of her gestures. Her face is not really clear if she turns or looks down, and in the bottom right you see again that she is cut off from the frame, not in the center. So these are not examples of good framing, whereas this is an example of good framing. So in this picture, which we can pretend is the video, she's right in the middle of the shot, and she can move her arms around and look all around. We can see her face clearly. Her arms, her gestures would be clearly visible. So these are for one person each, but obviously it's more difficult to get good framing with multiple speakers, but you just have to do your best to find a place for the camera, set it up so that they are in the shot, their gestures are in the shot, and their faces are in the shot, and you can ask people to move. Ask people, oh, can you sit here instead and look toward the camera, and you can tell them why, so that you can see a little bit better, so it'll be clearer. But if you can't, right? So here's an example of good framing with two people. So it's not perfect because on the edges, if they gesture outside, then that might not be visible, but you have to do the best you can to get them in the middle of the shot with their faces so that they're basically turned toward the camera. Another very important thing to consider when recording video is lighting. So the most important thing with lighting is to not have any bright light that comes into the camera. You don't want to have bright light behind the speakers because you won't be able to see them at all. Overhead lights that are really bright that create shadows on people's faces are also not very good. If you have a light that you can use, not really a flashlight, but if you can set up a light that isn't blinding people, helps to illuminate them, that's really helpful. But it's best if the light is behind the camera and it is illuminating the speakers, and we'll look at some examples. Another thing that a lot of cameras do automatically, but you should check and see if yours does to make sure that you're not going to forget this, is checking white balance. This is basically making sure that color is balanced correctly so it's recording how things really look. When the white balance is bad, white looks yellow. But if you check it and calibrate it beforehand, the white will look white and all the colors will look good. Usually if you need to calibrate it, which most cameras you don't have to do this, but you can just use a piece of white fabric or a napkin or something and it will calibrate to that and the colors will be fixed. But again, this won't apply to everyone, but if you need to do it, you can. So here's an example of, this is pointing at someone's face. You can't see her face at all, right? Because the light behind her is so bright. And this is what happens when there's a light behind speakers. The camera adjusts to the light and you won't be able to see them, which is going to sort of defeat the whole purpose of your video recording. But if you have the light, here's the same picture from before because the lighting is good. The lighting is not creating any bad shadows. It's illuminating their faces. And it's exactly what you want. They're not blinded by any lights, but they're clear and there's nothing bright behind them. So basically you want to watch out for windows. You don't want to sit people right in front of a bright window. Okay, so now connecting the audio and the video. You might be saying, okay, if I'm going to record video, I might as well just use the camera and forget all that stuff about the audio recorder. But the camera is going to be far away. And even if you have a nice shotgun microphone, like I talked about earlier, on the camera, the quality is still not going to be that good because it's going to pick up everything in front of it. It's going to pick up noise. So if there's a street outside the house behind the speakers, it's going to pick that up really loudly. So you want to use the audio recorder and the video recorder or the camera. The video camera microphone is a good backup in case anything happens, but you also want to make sure that you've got your audio recorder set up, just like everything we talked about earlier. So when I'm going to record, I go in, I set up the camera. Well, I ask the speakers to sit where they're comfortable, and I set up the camera where it's going to record them, and then I set up my audio recorder, and I set up the microphone so that everybody's got their microphone. I check the levels, and then when I go start the recording, I do what's called slating, like when you watch a Hollywood movie behind the scenes and they've got that black and white thing, and they clap it together. That's because the loud noise makes it really easy to synchronize the audio recording and the video recording. And then the visual movement of the slate also helps you do it on the video side. So the way that I do it is by clapping. I do a really big, wide clap. I do 3 loud claps so that my arms are clearly moving in front of the camera. The claps are loud enough to be heard on the camera audio, every audio recorder. That way, when it's time to synchronize everything together, which is really important later on, it's not too hard. And I do it at the end too, just in case, but it's mostly important at the very beginning. So here's an example of some sort of video editing software, and you can see the 3 huge spikes where the slating happened. And the computer can automatically, a lot of the time, depending on the software you use, the computer can align those automatically because it can sense them, and then it will connect everything. You won't have to worry about it. But even if it doesn't do it automatically, worst case scenario, by listening, you can sync them up manually. So this is getting into a little bit of video editing and video converting. So this is something that takes a lot of experience and a lot more. It would be a lot more time to go into in detail. But basically, your cameras or your video recorders are going to record as a different file type from the file type you eventually want to use and save in an archive. They're going to save as MTS files. So you need to convert them. And a good software for converting MTS to MP4 is this free software called Handbrake. You'll need a computer of some kind, and you'll transfer the MTS files from the camera to the laptop or the computer, and then you use Handbrake to convert them to MP4. So this process by itself would be its own whole presentation, so I can't really go into it right now. But that's for archiving and for transcribing, if you want to transcribe, which again is its own whole process. But transcription is another really important part of language documentation, where you are transcribing, you're writing down what people are saying, translating, and to do this, you need an MP4 file. Also, for transcription and archiving, the video and audio files should at some point be about the same length. For transcription, not really for archiving. But for transcription in Elon, you want to have them about the same length, so you're going to need to sync them and edit them a little bit. And there are some free software here that's linked that you can use for this. I'm not sure. I haven't really used any of these. I used HitFilm a little bit. But whichever one you find that works for you, that's the one you should stick with. One of the last things I'm going to talk about, subtitles can be really helpful for creating video materials, especially for educational materials. So if you want to add subtitles, you can actually do it with Elan. So I didn't really talk about it before, but Elan is a really awesome free software that's used a lot in language documentation and linguistics for creating transcriptions, because it creates what's called time-aligned transcriptions. So you import your video and audio files, which are the same length, and your transcriptions will be marked at a certain time point on the video and audio. So you can do this with Elan, and you can create subtitles this way too. So if you click this link, which I'm going to upload these slides afterward, if you click this link, then you can see a tutorial of how to do this. But basically you want to have an SRT or SBV file in the end, and that way you can use these subtitles in different programs. Okay, but that also is its own whole tutorial that we can get into another time. I talked a little bit earlier about managing your media files, your audio and your video files. So something that people forget to think about a lot of the time is dealing with the data. They say, okay, I just spent all this energy setting up my recording, and I recorded people for an hour and a half, and now I'm done. But you're really not done at all, because you have to take that data from your recorder, and you're going to have to move it to somewhere where you can store it safely. The recorder can't hold all of your data forever. So you want to think about where you're going to store them. How are they going to be stored? Are they going to be on the computer, on a hard drive? Are they going to be on an SD card? Will they be in an archive eventually? How are they going to be named? Where do they go after you've edited them? That kind of thing. This is really important, and you have to figure out your own process. And it takes time, but it's good to think about it beforehand so you know what's coming after you've made a recording. And then I think with audio and video recording, one of the most important tips I can give is to stay organized. Try your best to stay organized, because if you get into a habit of making recordings and then taking a break, so let's say on a Wednesday night, I record a conversation for 2 hours, and then I'd say, okay, I'm just going to take a break, and then I forget to deal with that data. And then it's Saturday, and I do another recording. And then on Sunday, I look and I say, oh, I have 2 recordings. I don't remember which one has which name. I don't remember the metadata. I didn't write down who was in the recording on Wednesday, and now I can't remember, and I'll never know because I didn't write it down anywhere. I don't remember what time it was or where we recorded. So basically, my advice is as soon as the recording is done, move your files to where they need to be, at least temporarily. Put them on your computer. Give them a good name. Record your metadata. Write it down in your notebook. Write it down on the computer somewhere. This is so important for making sure that this data will be useful. Okay, so that is the last of my information. I have a few exercises if you want to do these on your own. These are not for right now, but if you want to do these over the next week or so and then bring some feedback back to the LDTC ELP page and talk about your experience. So one exercise is if you have an audio recorder, try recording at different places in your home. Try sitting on a different chair or in a different room. See which place is the best. Point it in different directions. Try sitting behind it or to the side of it. And then listen to them with headphones if you can and see what you notice. See what was the clearest, what was the best recording. Yeah, try to find out the best setup for your recorder. This is the kind of thing that you always want to do with a new piece of equipment, so you know before you get to the real thing, and you know what it's going to be like and what's going to be the best. The second exercise is to try making a short audio recording with your phone. So even if you have an audio recorder, try recording on a smartphone if you can. Are there any problems with the quality? Do you think it sounds as good? Does it matter if you're sitting at where the phone bottom is faced to you or if it's facing away from you? What about if you sit really close or kind of far away? Try these things out and see what it sounds like. Another exercise, if you have a camera, a video recorder, or a smartphone that can record video, try making videos of yourself speaking in different places in your home. Maybe a window in the background, or with the window in front of you, behind the camera. See which kinds of places have the best lighting, and see what has the best result. This is the best kind of practice that you can do before you record speakers in a natural setting, or just talking about vocabulary, whatever. Doing this stuff beforehand is really good, because it lets you get to know your equipment. And once you know that, you won't forget, and you will make sure to do your best to create the best quality recording every time. Okay, so before I ask for questions, I just wanted to bring up some things to think about. So if you're going to make recordings, audio or video, what are the goals of your recordings? What are they going to be used for? These don't have a definite answer. I'm not looking for answers. These are just things for you to think about as you think about what's in this presentation. Also, what do you think are some challenges that you might face specifically in your own work? in recording audio and video? What do you think might come up? What's a specific a characteristic of the area that you usually work in? So like when I record in Nassau, in Indonesia, sorry for the loud cars again. When I record in Indonesia, all of the houses are along a highway. So for me, there's a lot of car noise. That's something I have to think about a lot. So think about what applies to you. And then, yeah, so if there's any questions, I'm going to look at the chat. Wow, it looks like there's a lot of things on here. So let me try and go through it. Oh, awesome. I see some great... Yes, sorry for the loud car noises in the background of my stream. I see somebody said, I just recorded through Zoom, and I'm now wondering if that was okay. It just depends about each specific platform's policy on in-app recordings. So you can try to look it up inside the terms of service, but it depends on individual things, and I'm not sure. I just try to avoid it so that I don't have to deal with it. But yeah, you want to look into it in your own specific situation, and especially just talk to speakers or people that you're recording about that possibility of trying something else. Someone also said, I need the Elan software. Okay, thank you, Anna, for putting the link. Let me see if there's... so I'm trying to get down to the questions. What's a good way to record group interactions? Like if we want to record a whole group of singers. Great question, Anna. Thank you. So for recording a big group, this is the kind of setup that I would use. If it's let's say there's a group of singers. Let's say you have 7 people who are going to sing a song together. I would find a place, or I would ask them to help me find a place that they're comfortable, that they can all stand or sit in the way that they're going to perform, and have them all facing one direction, and set the camera far enough away that they're all clearly in the frame. So then the camera is taken care of. Then I'm going to use an audio recorder, which usually I'll have the recorder hooked up to a shotgun microphone, which will be set in front of the group, and then it's pointed at them. So I've got a camera. The camera usually has a microphone. And then there's an audio recorder with a microphone pointed at the group. That way you have the information being recorded in a lot of different ways. When I record group interactions of conversations, we do something differently. So with a conversation, we want to have each individual speaker's voice recorded if possible. So in that situation, in addition to the setup that I just said, so people are usually sitting in a circle, which isn't great for video, but you can't avoid it sometimes. But we also have audio recorders with lapel microphones or headset microphones that sit on speakers' heads and go around to their mouth. That's another good way to record a group. Hercules asks, when we plug in a mic to the speakers, they get conscious. How do we ensure they don't have any bias? That's a good question. Oh, sorry about that. So, yes, some people do not react well to having a microphone placed on them because they get nervous or they start thinking too hard. It really depends if you can find a way to make that speaker comfortable. So, having the microphone a little bit off to the side, or you put if you need to use a lapel microphone, you hook it up, and if they say, oh, this feels weird, or they're acting weird, you can just start a conversation with them about something else first. So saying, okay, let's talk about what you did today, or if you're friends with them, you can talk about something completely different and slowly ease into the recording. That way they're more comfortable. But that is a difficult issue, so good question. Eduardo asks, what language are you studying now? I am studying a language called Nassau, spoken in Sumatra. So, let's see, I can pull up the ethnologue. It's spoken by around 3,000 people in Bengkulu province in Sumatra. and I've only been to, yeah, so I don't have access to it right now, but if you can find this page, there's a lot of good information. I've only been there one time, though I've been working remotely with Nassau speakers for, yeah, about 8 months. So that's been going really well. Emmanuel says there's a lot of noise of animals. Absolutely. That's another issue with the recordings that I've made as well. Krishna asks, do we get a good quality recording via Zoom or telephone conversations? I would say the quality will never be great from Zoom or telephone conversation. But like I talked about in the remote recording slide, it's better to have a lower quality recording when you can't make a high quality recording than nothing at all. But if you have the opportunity to use audio recorders, dedicated audio recorders, that's always going to be better. But if it's a if it's a choice between um, a low quality recording and not recording at all, absolutely try your best to get the telephone conversation or the Zoom recording. That stuff can be so useful even if it's not perfect. Barcene asks, what if recording an immersion classroom with at least 15 students to determine the percentage of engagement in the language? What is a good tool to use and how do we set up the area? So that's an interesting question. I've never recorded a group that large, but you wouldn't be able to get the same level of quality like using a lapel microphone. I think it wouldn't be possible to set up a lapel microphone for every student. But setting up maybe a recorder, a camera, as long as everybody has given consent to be recorded, setting up the camera in one section of the room that can see the most people's faces, and then setting up a microphone somewhere else in the room so that the people in the back can at least be heard. But that's a difficult one. Yeah, recording a situation like that would not be easy. So you might have to try a couple of different things. Robbie asks, what if you wanted to record a social situation, such as a discussion during a meal, a classroom setting, or some fishers having beers, etc.? Great question. So that's very difficult, right? Oh yeah, sorry, Anna. Um, it's really difficult to um, record in a naturalistic social setting like that because by setting up the equipment, you're already making it a little bit less natural. And it's hard to have all that set up and then have a social situation. Um, so that's a difficult thing. But in my research, I've tried to do the closest I can get so far, which is to find some people who are already kind of hanging out. And then I say, hey, you guys are hanging out. Would you mind if you just keep hanging out, but with this equipment so that I can record your conversation? And we talk about why I'm recording the conversation. And they say, sure. And then they basically do the same thing they were doing before, but it's never going to be exactly the same, right? So the thing about discussion during a meal or in the classroom, yeah, it's difficult because this requires some setup. And this is something that people are working on all the time, thinking about these techniques to try to find a way to ethically record natural social situations. Okay, another question. Do you have any recommendations for a lamp to make a recording in a darker space or even at night? I don't have any specific recommendations, but you can just look up on the internet cheap cheap camera lights that can mount on top of your camera. And some of them are not very expensive and they still provide good light. And you don't even want one that's too bright because it can be really bright on speakers' faces. But for like a lamp to sit in the middle of the group, I've never used anything like that. Yeah, so just whatever you can find. What it comes down to with the whole setup of audio recording, video recording in different environments, you're always going to face unique challenges to yourself. So you want to try different things with your own equipment. You want to see what works and what doesn't work, and you're always going to be getting better. So if you get a little lamp and you're in the dark, you're recording at night, outside or in a place that has the power went out, which that's happened with us where the power went out, and you just keep going. You're just going to try it, and you're going to see what works, see what doesn't work, and you learn from it. And so there's not any specific equipment that's the best for language documentation. It's whatever equipment you have that can help you create the best quality recordings. And when I say best quality, it's the best quality for your goals. So if you're doing acoustic analysis and phonology and phonetics, you want to make sure that your audio recording is really clear, high quality. But if you're studying gestures and conversation, you want to make sure that your camera is set up really well and that the speakers are clearly visible. Things like that. So make sure you take your goals into account when you're going to create these materials. And if your goals is something like preservation or revitalization or native language education, you might want to invest in other tools like the shotgun microphone that'll let you record a group of people singing, these cultural activities that might be more important than something like a word list for your project. So just make sure that whatever you do, you're going with your own goals, right? So yeah, that's a good question. Okay, are there any more questions? I'll wait a few minutes for some more questions. Here, I can stop sharing my screen so you guys can see what I look like. Let's see if I can. I'm not sure actually. Oh, maybe not. That's something you have to change beforehand. So, okay. Are there any more questions about anything in the presentation while I'm here? I'm going to upload the slides on the group so that you can access the slides and the links in the slides. Awesome. Thanks for your comment, Jose. Yeah, sorry about the rocky start. I'm glad we got it working. Yeah, that was the issue earlier. I had the software open, and that's actually why I couldn't get the thing to run. So let's see if it'll let me do it. Oh, there we go. Yep. Okay. I think that I should presentation. So sorry you couldn't see me, but let me upload the slides as soon as I can. I can't do it right now, but as soon as the video is done, I'll upload the slides so that everybody can have access. Are there any more questions? Anything about file management? Okay, Robbie asked a question. Nowadays, everybody makes their own videos in many activities. What do you think to use their video in a good ethic? Yeah, you can't see me. Let me fix it. Understanding your question, it's about using other people's videos for language. If you want to use somebody else to talk about aid, then it's really important to get their permission and their consent. And that's something I didn't doing what institution during the presentations there are for ethical standards. But getting consent to use materials is also extremely important. Eye on this. Okay, I think it's still going. Yeah, thanks for your comments, Eduardo. Yeah, no problem. I will share the slides as soon as this is done. Are there any more questions? I think mine is a bit behind, but